Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's William Bellamy. I'm back with you again. This evening, I want to talk about Afghanistan. I'm going to give you a brief history and give you my experiences and my thoughts about Afghanistan and what's gone on since the 2001 invasion. And just, it's a soldier's perspective. But it's a soldier based on being there and having degrees in economic relations or economics and international relations. So, anything I say, please do your own research, question what I have to say. If you like the content I'm putting out, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. If you disagree, hit dislike and tell me why in the comments you don't like what I'm saying. Now that I've done the standard, let's get started. The country of Afghanistan. Archaeologists have found evidence of farming communities as far back as 50,000 years ago in Afghanistan, so it's been around for a minute. Not as a country, but the people of Afghanistan. They survived the Hindus, the Buddhists, the Muslims, the Mongols, the British, the Russians, the Soviets, the Indians, and we're currently there now. So keep that in mind as we go through this. In 1709, they achieved their independence from the Mongol Empire, which is actually kind of impressive considering the only one before that had ever come close to conquering them was Alexander in 330 BCE. And even he couldn't get a complete grasp on a country. That's kind of interesting considering how many countries at that point he had been able to overrun and completely control. All of Greece, Persia, you see where I'm going with this. Now, in 1837, they defeated a Sikh army. And I'll digress a little bit and talk about the terrain of Afghanistan. To the west, you have Iran, or formerly Persia. To the east, you have Pakistan. But until the separation, Pakistan and India were still all India. So you had India on the eastern border. You have the stands, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan to the north, and a small little part that juts out that borders with China. Now, that's important because from a historical standpoint, they're at a crossroads. You had Islam coming from the west. You had Hindu coming from the east. From the northeast, you had Buddhism. So Afghanistan has always been kind of a crossroads, and it's also kind of been considered a buffer. And that buffer showed itself during what they call the Anglo Wars. And that was the British control India, you had the Russian Empire to the north. And the Anglo Wars were Britain trying to control Afghanistan as a buffer zone between British India and the Russian Empire. The Anglo Wars, the first Anglo War was 1839 to 1842. The second was 1878 to 1850, or correction, 1880. And the third and last was in 1919. Which, if you think about historically, 1919 was at the end of the First World War, but the October Revolution had already happened in Russia and it had become the Soviet Union. So you had the Soviet Union to the north of Afghanistan, and you had British India on the east. And the British were worried about first Russian and Soviet influence into India, because there were huge resources they were pulling out of India at the time. Now, at the end of the Anglo War in 1919, King Amanullah declared independence. He established relationships with the then Soviet Union and the Weimar Republic, which is Germany. But even while that was going on, there was still infighting. Because Afghanistan always has, and there's a good chance always will be, very tribalistic. And it's even more complicated than that because you have regions. And the regions are kind of divided by language along the way, but it's also by clan. Because you have Nuristan and Nuristani, then you have the Dari, then you have the Pashtu, then you have the various people that have immigrated into it from Turkmenistan and places like that. And their loyalty has always been first to their clan and into that tribal distinction. And if you go back to Napoleon's theory that a state is comprised of institutions and security forces, but to create a nation, you need a sense of nationality. Afghanistan has never truly had a sense of nationality. And that was one of the things that's always set them apart as a country that most people do not understand. Because as Americans, we really don't understand that because we identify as Americans. We may have our racial divides or religious divides, or depending on where you're from. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Philadelphia Eagles fans. But we don't understand it the same way they do. They have never developed that sense of nationality as a country to want to be separate. In fact, the average citizen, if you ask them, they just as soon be Nuristani in a separate country where they're on their own. Now, along the way, yes, it was a country, but you still had warlords that controlled their areas. And it's really hard to explain if you've never been to Afghanistan, the desolation and the distance. Because you do have major cities, but they're very few, and they're very far from everything else. So just because you control Kabul and Kandahar does not mean you can control the entire country, as the British learned, as we learned. There's a whole area that they're going to control themselves, and the strongest person in that area is going to be the one that wins. Now, we move forward. So you have King Amanullah, who developed his relationships. You have the warlords who control their little areas, many of which did pay tribute to the central government, but they control their areas autonomously. In 1978, you had the Sour Revolution, which led to a communist government. And although they took over the government, it was still fairly weak, which led to the 1979 Soviet invasion, in which they attacked the palace, killed all the bodyguards and the president himself. They put their own person in place. And that led to a Soviet attempt at occupation, which lasted until 1989. Now, that led to the emergence of the Mujahideen, who were fighting the Soviets. They're really great. If you really want to understand how this war was fought, check out Les Graw's book, The Bear Came Over the Mountain, which is a Soviet version of their operations and what happened from 1979 to 1989. And then what happened when the bear came over the mountain, which is where he actually interviewed Mujahideen leaders. Now, historically, we supported the Mujahideen. We got weapons for them. We taught them how to use Stinger missiles, which had a huge effect. The first helicopter was hit with a Stinger missile just outside Jalalabad, which I've been to. In fact, on my third time there, 33 Marines were operating out of Jalalabad. But when the Soviets had finally taken enough casualties and the Cold War was coming to an end because the Soviet Union had been bankrupted, the Soviets pulled out, the United States pulled its advisors out, and it left a power vacuum in the country of Afghanistan. Once again, the warlords were vying for power. There was a central government, but it was very weak, which led us to the emergence of the Taliban. And the story that was told to a group I was with by Governor Galani in Kandahar was, at one point, there was a girl who was assaulted, and I will leave it at that because I don't want to deal with getting my video banned, or we will just leave it at that. There was this guy named Mullah Muhammad Omar. He was a religious figure, but he was also competing as a warlord. They hunted down the man that had done this, and they executed him. And for the citizens of Kandahar, this represented the first time somebody had done something for the good of the community without being asked for anything. He didn't ask him for support. He didn't ask him for, he just decided to go out and do this. And that's what led to the Taliban to begin gaining favor in the country. Now, in the end, what it led to was strict Sharia law, which was burqas and girls cannot be educated and public executions and all the bad things that came with the Taliban in the end. But as a person, I can understand why the local community would look at them and go, wow, nobody's ever done anything for us and not asked for anything. Where that initial support came from. What it led to was something not so great. Now, we fast forward. Osama bin Laden is an up-and-coming terrorist. He actually wasn't even a terrorist, for the record. He was a horrible commander in combat in Afghanistan, if you research it. He wasn't even a good operational head. He was a figurehead and a financier because he came from money. But after they had been chased around, he sits down with the Taliban and says, look, I'll provide this funding for you. What I need is camps to train my people, which is how Al-Qaeda came to be in Afghanistan and how they trained the hijackers that led to 9/11. Now we fast forward to 9/11 and go to the American invasion of Afghanistan. Initially, everything went fast. The Taliban tumbled. We were able to move forward. We were able to start creating institutions within Afghanistan. But the thing that people have to remember is Afghanistan is still a very desolate country. They have very few major cities. Those cities are far from everything else. And I will tell you from my own experience of opening the road from Kandahar to Kabul, where I served as a liaison with a Romanian battalion clearing that route, every single bridge was collapsed. We were going through towns that had not seen anybody besides the Taliban for so long that we would sit down with village elders and they would talk to us and go, why have you not been back for so long? Because the Romanians were still armed with Russian small arms and Russian vehicles, and they thought the Romanians were still the Soviet Union. They didn't even realize the Soviet Union had pulled out in 1979. And what I learned from talking to them was the average Afghan citizen in one of these villages, all they care about is keeping a roof over their heads, keeping their family safe, and feeding their family. They don't hate America. They don't want to destroy America. They want to be safe. And given the history I talked about, I mean, show me one decade where Afghanistan wasn't plunged into war of one form or another. If it wasn't a major power coming in, it was the warlords internally, which led to that. So my experience in Afghanistan spread over a decade. I was there multiple times. I lost friends there. I have friends that came back missing pieces. One of the best mentors I could ever have asked for came back from Afghanistan legally blind. But with that being said, here's what I saw in Afghanistan. The initial me getting there, we were still dealing with warlords. There was no national army. There was no really any national institutions. I watched us begin to open schools and dig wells in villages. I saw the Afghan National Army begin to form. I was in country and helped design the plan and implement the plan for the first national parliamentary and council election. And I would like to state for the record that very first election, outside observers found almost no discrepancies in how it was run. I'm very proud of that. I'm proud of the moment I walked into an Afghan girls' school and I looked at the little girl sitting in that room. And there's little girls in that room the same age as my daughter. And they get to learn now. Now let's fast forward to where we are now. What is the answer for Afghanistan? Can we help build Afghanistan into a nation? No, we can't. We can help them build security. We can help them build an economy. We can help them build schools. We can help them build hospitals. But we cannot create a safe, successful nation for them. They have to do that for themselves. So we're at a point where we have to choose. Have we done everything we can for them with giving them this infrastructure, by giving them these security forces? And maybe it is time for us to leave. Because winning in Afghanistan will never be what Americans consider winning. And at some point, maybe us leaving will allow them to come to a position of peace. Even if we don't agree with the peace they find. Because that is not up to us. We can give them all the tools, but they have to decide their own future. Now, with that being said, I don't regret my time there. I don't hate Islam or Muslims or the citizens of Afghanistan. In fact, I have far more good to say about all of these things than I do bad. So you make your own choice about it, do your own research. Maybe it's time for us to let them decide their own future. Well, that's going to do it for me, but if you like what I have to say, like and subscribe, share with your friends. If you don't, hit dislike and tell me what you think in the comments. I'm sure I'm probably going to get some for my assessment of this one. But everybody have a good evening, and I'll talk to you later.